Okay, today we're talking about 3.4 extension, which remember 3.4 was on multi-step inequalities. So today we're going to take that a little bit further and talk about compound inequalities. So all you are going to need today are a piece of paper for your notes. So go ahead and label this title and we will get started. All right, the first thing I want to get down is the definition of a compound inequality. And a compound inequality is formed by joining two inequalities with the word and or the word or. So we're going to talk about both of those types today. So all we're doing is taking two inequalities, writing them as one sentence, and then also putting them on one graph. So please get that down. Okay, so here are the two different types, so let's get these definitions down. The first type that we're going to talk about is and the solutions consist of numbers that make both inequalities true. For or, it's solutions that consist of numbers that make at least one of the inequalities true. So one thing that helps me remember this is if I go to a restaurant and the restaurant says, with your dinner, you get soup and salad. That means you get to have both as well as whatever your main entree is. You'll get your soup and your salad. Or if you go and you order something and they say you get soup or salad, you only get to pick one of those. So that kind of helps me remember the difference between the two. Something else that I would like to include for an and is you are going to see this written as, for example, 2 is less than x, which is less than or equal to 5. So notice here we have the smallest number on the left, the largest number on the right, and x in the middle. My graph is going to look like this, where I'm going to have 2, 5, and then maybe I'll put a 3 here because that falls right in between. This 2 is less than or equal to x. If I was to graph 2 is less than or equal to x, remember that's the same thing as x is greater than 2. I would have an open circle shading to the right. Here for x is less than or equal to 5, I would have a closed circle shading to the left. So now if you can imagine this, the entire number line would be shaded because everything, because everything this way would be shaded and everything that way. And here, if we only want what makes them both true, I would only shade in between. So here, I'm going to have just this middle highlighted with this closed circle above 5 and the open circle above 2. So let's try the second one of this or. What if I have x is greater than 6 or x is less than -1? This one you do not write as one whole statement, and you're going to see the word. So if I go ahead and make my number line here for this one, I'm going to have 6, I'm going to do 0, and then I'm going to do -1, and -1 is closer to 0 because that's how it would be on a number line. For x is greater than or equal to 6, I would have a closed circle pointing to the right, and for the other one, I'm going to have an open circle pointing to the left. So look at these two differences. You can see how, why do I keep doing that? You can see that there's some big differences here. For and, we're shading in the middle. For or, we're shading on the outside. For and, you're writing it as one inequality. For or, you're writing it as two separate ones with the word or on the inside. So let's try to do this on our own. It says, write a word sentence as an inequality. Graph the inequality. So the first one, a number x is greater than -8 and less than or equal to 4. So here I see that keyword of and. So if you look at your notes, I should have this written as one inequality. So the first one says a number x is greater than -8. I would write that as x is greater than -8. the second one, and less than or equal to 4. I would still use x because we're talking about that same number, less than or equal to 4. Now remember for and, we write this as one inequality. So I'm going to write the smallest number first, which is -8. I'm going to put x in the middle and 4 to the right. Now I need to plug in my inequality symbols. So if you look at this first one, x is greater than -8. It's pointing at -8. So here it's still pointing at -8. For this second one, it's pointing at x. So I'm going to have it still pointing at the x. So there's my inequality symbol. Now I'm going to make my number line. So I'm going to do -8, 0, and 4. And notice my 0 and 4 are closer to each other because that's how it would be on a number line. I am going to put an open circle above -8 and a closed circle above 4. I only want what they have in common, so I only shade the inside. That's it. That's how every single and inequality should look. So let's try this second one. It says a number y is at most 0 or at least 7. So let's do this, the one on the left. It says y is at most 0. So that means the highest it can be is 0. So I have y is less than or equal to 0. The second one, or at least 7. So again, using that same variable of y. And here it's going to be greater than or equal to 7. And I'm going to put that word or in between. So this is my inequality. And now I just need to graph it. So I'm going to make my number line. I'm going to do 0, 7, and I will put a 3 in between. And then I'm going to do a closed circle above 0, shaded to the left, a closed circle at 7, shaded to the right. And those are both my final answers. I would recommend, if you were confused at all, to go back and rewatch this section or the last one. All right, so let's look here. It says solve -3 is less than -2x plus 1, which is less than or equal to 9. So just by looking at it, you should be able to identify that this is an and compound inequality. So we're looking for that overlap. And in order to graph, we have to have x alone. So here's what's a little different. I need to isolate x, so using inverse. So I need to add a -1 to get that away. But when I do this, I need to do it on the left side and the right side. So I'm going to add a -1 to both. So it becomes -4 is less than -2x, which is less than or equal to to +8. So again, if I look at this x is not alone yet. So now I need to divide by -2. And again, I'm doing that on both sides. So -4 divided by -2 is a +2. Remember those rules we learned. When we multiply or divide by a negative number, what happens? The sign flips. So it becomes 2 is greater than x, which is greater than or equal to -4. Now, if you remember and you go back to when we first started talking about inequalities, we wanted to read from least to greatest. And right now, this is not least to greatest. So the last thing that I want to do is I'm going to flip it back. So I'm going to go -4 is less than or equal to x, which is less than 2. And now I'm going to graph it. So I am going to put -4, 0, and 2. -4, I'm going to have that shaded in. 2, I'm going to have that as an open circle. And I'm just going to shade the inside. So that's my final answer. So the big takeaways here is that we first need to isolate x, and we do that to both sides. And then the second is that we need it written least to greatest. And then 3, for the and, we want the overlap or the middle. So we're going to practice one or now. So for here we have solve 3x minus 5 is less than -8, or 2x minus 1 is greater than 5. Graph the solution. So I'm going to treat these as two separate problems. So first I'm going to look at 3x minus 5 is less than -8. And I'm going to solve for x. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides. And I get 3x is less than -3. Divide by 3. So x is less than -1. Now I'm going to do the other side. So I'm going to solve for x, and I'm going to add 1. And I get 2x is greater than 6. Divide by 2. And I get x is greater than 3. And because this is an or, I am going to bring that or word down. So I have x is less than -1, or x is greater than 3. And now I'm going to graph those. So I'm going to make my number line. On my number line, I am going to put a -1, a 0, and a 3. They are both going to have an open circle above them. The x is greater than 3 will be pointing to the right, and x is less than -1 will be pointing to the left. So you can see that these are two separate problems, and they're very different and they're very unique than anything that you've ever seen. So please make sure that you are using your notes, and if you need to, go back and rewatch any of this video. If you're working on your homework and you're confused and you're like, oh, this is like one of those problems from notes, go back and watch this section so that way you're making sure you're doing a really good job. So I will check your notes tomorrow and then come with questions so you guys can get started on your homework.